we're here. This is a fun event, I think. I had a chance to look at the book, and I think we're all in for a treat. My name is Tom Urell. I'm the library's communications officer, and I just want to mention a couple other cool events that we're doing this term, so you can come back and see some other stuff. Next week, we're in 70 science maps that look at different sort of conceptual diagrams, infographics, data mapping, all of that good stuff. Some programs to go along with it. The curator of the event, Kate, is going to be here at the end of next week, so you can watch our website and you'll see the details there. We are partnering with the Humanities Center to bring poet Dana Gioia to campus. He's going to be doing a program on February 15th here in the library on Disappearing Ink, a book that he wrote that is about the sort of future of poetry in a digital age, and it sounds like it's a really fascinating idea. So we have comment cards available if you'd like to give us any feedback, and I want to give an extra special shout out to our co-sponsors who helped us make this event possible. The School of Law Library was hugely helpful, the bookstore as always, and if you want to help the library put on programs like this, you are able to fill out an application to be a library supporter. There's more information about that at the sign-in table out front. We're filming today's event. It's going to be put on YouTube and then linked on Facebook and Twitter, where you can contact us, give us feedback about this event or anything else about the library. We're Northeastern University Libraries on Facebook and @Club Snell on Twitter. So I think I just said that I had a chance to look at this book, and I went through the chapter on the location, some of the sort of seediest, darkest, scariest, and creepiest events in mob history in Boston went down, and I was reading it on the T and I got spooked. I have seen about half of these places myself and walked past them, Winter Hill neighborhood in Somerville, and you know, the part of Southie that now feels pretty swanky with little boutiques and stuff. There's a lot of sketchy stuff going on. So the two authors who are with us today to bring us this story are Beverly Ford, Stephanie Schorow. Did I get that right? Like Zorro?
Like Zorro.
All right. And they've both been Boston area writers and reporters for a long time and have brought stories through the Herald, the New York Daily News, the London Times Mirror, the Access Magazine, Bloomberg News. Stephanie has written books on the crime of the century, how the Brinks robbers stole millions in the hearts of Boston, east of Boston, Notes from the Harbor Islands, and many more. So I am excited, and I'm hoping you can join me in welcoming Beverly Ford and Stephanie Schorow.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? If you can't hear me, just yell. Thank you so much for inviting us here. We really appreciate the invitation, library, and we're glad there's so many people willing on their lunch break to come over and hear about crime. And I guess I was interested to hear our book described as a treat, because it gets pretty gruesome at times, but it is a fascinating history nonetheless, and we're so glad that you're here to help share it with us. I'm going to start out, because it's a college, with a little quiz. You weren't expecting that, were you? Okay. Can anyone name this movie? And hopefully we'll get it to play and it'll be loud enough for you to hear. And see.
I need your help. I can't tell you what it is. You can never ask me about it later. We're gonna hurt some people. Who's calling out there?
Who said the town? Okay. All three of you. Okay, you all get A's. Very good. Woo, well, great. But I run that little snip because I think it's interesting to talk about how it's interesting to start out because what we are talking about in this book, we try to separate myth from reality. We try to give just the facts, ma'am, about these mobsters. They had very colorful lives. They're very interesting characters. They're also very violent characters, and we try to present a full picture of them. One of the questions that we're asked is, why do another book on Boston's mobsters? I mean, there's a lot of books out there. There's a Black Mass, there's books by many of these mobsters. Why should we do another one? Well, let's explain. And we'll show it in a sort of graph format. So, we did the mobster flow chart here. And we, in our book, go all the way back to the past. We go back to a mobster named Charles King Solomon, the Guston gang that was in South Boston, the Lombardo gang that was in the North End, Raymond Patriarca, who was in the Rhode Island, the Angiulo family of the North End, the Raymond Patriarca. We made him a little small because he was not so effective as a mob leader. The South Boston, we all hear about Whitey, the South Boston, but there were many South Boston gangs before Whitey Bulger was on the scene. We also make some connections to the Brinks robbery of 1950, which was a kind of a major robbery, and a guy named Edward Wimpy Bennett, which was, if I were him and had that nickname, I would apply for a rewrite from the Mafia nickname department, but that happened to be his nickname. The Winter Hill gang you know about. Then there was the Irish Mob War, Frank Cadillac Salemi, the Animal Barboza. And then we have to talk about the FBI and their culpability in that. Steve the Rifleman Flemmi, Johnny Monterano, Kevin Weeks, and then our friend Whitey Bulger. But wait, there's more. We also talk about other people from the North End, Ilario Zanino from the North End, Gigi Portella, the McLaughlin brothers, Joseph Russo, James Martirano, Vincent the Bear Martirano, Brian Halloran, Patrick Nee was a South Boston guy, and then another animal, Ferrara. Got that? Everyone take notes? But what we did this to show how complicated mob history is. That there are so many connections among these people. If you start looking at all the leaders of the Boston, all the Brahmins and all the philosophers, you'll find a lot of connections. So too are the connections among the criminal element, and they are all connected. And so our point in writing the book was to entangle all these threads, to lay it out in a reader-friendly guide, who these people are in brief little snippets, so that you could use it almost as a reference guide. Each one of these mobsters is his own story, but also we tried to show how they all connect to one another. So let's go through a couple of them, all right? Let me go back to the beginning. Charles King Solomon. How many people have heard of Al Capone? How many people have heard of King Solomon? Okay, one or two. Okay, you read the book, so you don't count. Basically, Charles Solomon was a mobster in the Prohibition period, in the 1920s, and played a very major role in bringing in booze and other liquor into the Boston area during that time. He was, in his own way, as prominent in Boston as Al Capone was in Chicago. Did anyone see the Burns documentary on Prohibition? Anybody here? A few people might have seen it, but he's mentioned a couple times, but he is an incredibly interesting, colorful character. For one thing, he's of Jewish ancestry. His parents came from Russia. I think he was born in Russia and immigrated here. He represents one of the contingency. Here's him in a later life, because the thing about King Solomon, he was not only a gangster, but he was a flamboyant person. And he also played a role sort of prominent in the city. Everybody knew him. He was very well known. He was the owner of, for a short time, of the Coconut Grove nightclub. Not during the fire, which some people have heard about, but a little bit before then. And so he was quite, this is a picture of the Coconut Grove, but he was quite prominent. Well, he started a habit at the Coconut Grove, which was to keep the doors of the nightclub closed, which later proved fatal some decades later during the fire. But he was worried about two things. He was worried about people sneaking up on him. He was worried about people running out on their bills. And he was well advised to worry about that, because one evening after hours at this club, which was the Cotton Club in Roxbury area, he was sitting at a table here when a number of gangsters grabbed him, hustled him into the bathroom, shots rang out, the shooters fled, and Solomon staggered out, holding his gut, saying, "They got me, the dirty rats," or something like that. Actually, I've seen a whole variety of comments about what he actually said, but was like, the dirty rats, they got me, the dirty rats. But they're all in the newspaper, so they're all true, right? Anyway, so it was big news in Boston. You can see these headlines are almost as big as the Prohibition himself. And let me draw your attention to one other thing. This is a photo that you can see for yourself on the BPL's very wonderful Flickr site. This is his funeral. Look at all the people turning out for his funeral and funeral procession. And this was a gangster and a guy who brought the booze into the city of Boston, and yet he was a very prominent figure. So he's a kind of a colorful character. This is one of the people arrested for his murder. It's another person arrested for his murder. Later, a number of people were found guilty of it. It took a while to convict him because, strangely enough, there were no witnesses. Surprise. But finally, they were convicted, and the saga of King Solomon is laid to rest. And now we'll move into another area, which is into South Boston, and talk about an Irish gang, the Guston gang, and I'll let Bev take it from here.
As Stephanie's already told you, crime is an equal opportunity employer in Boston. We have our Jewish mobsters, we have our Irish, we have our Italian mobsters. And this was one of the early Irish gangs, and they were specialists in obtaining liquor. So they had a little dispute, though, with the Italian contingent. First of all, I got to tell you that no one in this gang was named Guston. They were named after a street corner on which they hung out. That's how a lot of these Irish gangs got their names, because they hung out in a certain area of South Boston. The two principals of this gang were Steve and Frank Wallace. And here you see Steve Wallace in police custody. You can see him handcuffed there to a detective. And here's a mugshot of his brother. Oh no, this is a mugshot of him, Steve Wallace. Frank Wallace. This is Steve Wallace on the bottom here. Okay, this is a mugshot of his brother, Frank Wallace. And they got in a little dispute with some Italian gangsters up in the North End over bootlegging proceeds. And if you look at this photo, you'll see exactly what happened to them, because it's a crime scene photo. Three of the South Boston Guston gang members went to talk to the head of the North End mob, whose name was Joe Lombardo. And when they got up there, Joe Lombardo didn't exactly like the deal that they were presenting. They exchanged some gunfire. Two of the Guston gang members were dead. The third was found crouching down the hall in the office of a lawyer. Here we see this picture also from the Boston Public Library of detectives at the crime scene. You can see the window shot out there. And this building, you might not recognize it, but it still stands in the North End. It's called the Chester Building. And this is where this happened, this gunplay happened. And you can see out in the street in those days, people heard of this and they all turned out. They went to the Chester Building to find out what was happening. And that's what you see, all crowded down the bottom of, on the bottom of the screen here.
This is what a Twitter feed used to look like.
Yeah, in the old days. This office building is on Hanover Street in the North End. And interestingly, there's not a lot of old timers there who know the history. So if you go up there, a lot of people wouldn't be able to point out the building. But we did find the building. It's still there. It's at 317 Hanover Street. And it's still standing, so there's still kind of a little monument to that gang war between the Irish and the Italian mobsters. Now to talk a little bit about the Italian mobsters. This is Joseph Lombardo's mugshot and fingerprints. He's the one that was involved in the shootout with the Guston gang members. And neither he nor his, I believe this is a shot of his brother, Pasquale Lombardo. And they were questioned, they were picked up, but nobody was ever charged with his murder. One thing about the Italian mob in Boston is that we're a large city, and one would think that the headquarters of the Italian mob would be in Boston because we have a large population, but instead it was in Providence, Rhode Island. So all of the Boston mobsters, all the Italian Boston mobsters, paid homage to this guy. Does anyone recognize this picture? This is a real famous picture. Someone might recognize the name here, though.
It will be in Mob 101.
Yeah,
Next class.
if you missed it. His name is Raymond Patriarca, and he was the head of the mob for many, many years in Providence. So when Jerry Angiulo was collecting his proceeds from, gambling, he would go down to Providence and pay homage to Patriarcha and, hand over the money. So the center of mob activity really wasn't Boston. It was actually in Providence. That's where all these guys took their orders from. And this next picture this is a picture of Jerry Angiulo, and I don't know if anyone heard the name Angiulo, but they were a very large crime family, and they lived in the North End almost all their lives, and they basically ran, numbers, horse racing, betting, whatever they could. They didn't get into drugs at all, because there's a mob theory that once you start distributing drugs, you start having problems, people get arrested, people talk. So they stayed away from the drug distribution business. Here is another photo of them in court after they were arraigned for under the Rico statute. And that's racketeering and organized crime. Here we have Jerry's mugshot, a younger photo of him. And this is the building where the feds wired this building. This was their office in the North End on Prince Street. And the feds got all their information through this wire, which ironically, the wire was planted with the assistance of Whitey Bulger, who is gangster in both South Boston and Winter Hill. So he fed the FBI all this information about what the Angiulos were doing. The feds go in, they wire this office, and that's how they get indictments against Jerry Angiulo and his brothers. Now, the nice thing about living in Boston is that our neighborhoods haven't changed much over the years, which means this is Prince Street in the North End, if you guys don't recognize it. But this is where Jerry Angiulo lived. In fact, he lived in the house on the extreme right-hand side in that picture. And the neat thing is that you can still walk through the North End, still see Jerry Angiulo's house, still walk in the footsteps of all these mobsters who were there. And
many people in the neighborhood will remember that. I know when I'm doing research, I walk down the street, and if I see someone older, you can strike up a conversation, and they will have a story or two. There's a kind of a living memory in the North End of some, not all, but some of this stuff.
yeah, and this is Jerry Angiulo. I covered the Angiulos when they were in federal court as a reporter for the Boston Herald, and I can tell you these guys, Jerry Angiulo, Larry Zanino, you wouldn't think they would hurt a fly, because I'm only 5'5", and they were shorter than me. So they were kind of tiny guys, but ruthless nonetheless. And the interesting thing about Angiulo, when the feds finally came in to arrest him and 3 of his brothers were sitting in a restaurant in the North End eating, and the feds walk in, they arrest him, and Jerry Angiulo, with such arrogance as he's walking out, says to the rest of the diners there, I'll be back before my pork chops are cold, or I'll be back to finish my pork chops. And they escort him out. He never was back to finish those pork chops. So now we have the Irish, and I think you want to talk about the Mullins.
Yeah, the Irish, we've heard a lot about Whitey Bulger and his group, but there were a lot of precedents for the Irish mob activity in Boston. One was in South Boston, and like Bev had said, a lot of the early gangs are named after a place. This is John Joseph Mullen Square in South Boston, and a gang that was in this area was named the Mullen Gang, and that had a number of members, and they indulged in a lot of petty crime, and they did a lot of fighting among themselves. There was another group called the Colleens, and there was a lot of fighting among the mobsters. I mean, what's striking about organized crime is not just that they organized in their own units, but these units were busy fighting other units, and from the outside looking in, it was often astonishing that they didn't cooperate very much with each other. This is Winter Hill, and I think almost everybody here has probably passed this sign a number of times. It's right in the heart of Somerville, and yet there were a lot of activity in this area. This is Howie Winter, who actually ran the Winter Hill gang for a while, but the gang, again, was not named for him. His was named for the area. He just happened to have the same name as that, but there's often some confusion about that. This is Connie Hughes. He was another mobster. He was actually more in the Charlestown faction, but one thing that we get into is there was a huge battle between the Charlestown mobsters and the Winter Hill mobsters in the 60s through 70s. And I think it would be hard for us to go through it all. It really is a very complicated history. And if you've heard of the Hatfields and the Coys, where they started to kill each other, and after a while they forgot the original reason for it, that was kind of what was happening. So you had the Hughes killing McLaughlins, who killed the Hughes. This is a hit on one of the Hughes. This is a guy named Punchy McLaughlin, George Punchy McLaughlin, who was shot a number of times. So it was at least 2 or 3 times before they got him in this location in JP area, First Hills. And this is a very chilling photo because they finally got to him as he was waiting for the bus there, and they had tracked him down. And this is the photographers who had kids in the area reproduce the crime scene. So there's a kind of a casualness about this murder. I mean, they said, you know, the photographer probably told the kids, did you see it happen? Show us what happened. And they took their picture. So there was a kind of a casualness about this murder, and I think there was a perception that I found in the newspapers of the day that the Irish mobs, it was just the people killing each other. We don't have to worry about it's the mobster killing a mobster. Don't have to think about it. And I think that's a very dangerous assumption because there were often innocent victims. There was the families of the murder victims, and the families of the people involved were often the case. And I think we see that same attitude today when we hear about mobs in Roxbury or Lowell or different areas, and the idea is, well, they're just killing each other off. It's not something for us to get involved with, and I think that's a very dangerous assumption to make. You may have heard of this guy, Steve the Rifleman Flemmi, who was very prominent, and he worked both in the Irish and Italian. He had fingers in both pies, and he was also an informant for the FBI. This is his brother, Vincent, Jimmy the Bear Flemmi. He had a good nickname. He had a good nickname. Here's another picture of him. He did not end very well. He ended up in jail, and he never achieved the notoriety of his brother. Another person worth talking about, Johnny Motorano, who did a lot of work for the Winter Hill gang at the behest of the Irish mob, was this guy. He was a hired killer, and his is a kind of astonishing story. There are at least 20, he's confessed to at least 20 murders that he can remember. And so there may be more out there. But he was a professional hitman. And the amazing thing is that he turned state witness, he gave information, and he's walked the street today. He's not in any jail, he's not even in any protective custody. He's out. And so it's interesting to think with this 3 strikes you're out, there's been a lot of debate, like this guy committed 20 murders, and yet he is out now because he's deemed not to be a menace. Just saying. Gigi Portello, there's a very funny story about him that tell.
Gigi Portello is not your biggest gangster. In fact, he probably would not even be a footnote in mob history if it wasn't for one incident. In fact, it's a very funny incident. Gigi Portello, one night was out clubbing, and there was a little shootout at a club on the North Shore. Gigi got hit in the behind, and when he was taken to the hospital, the doctors took out the bullet, and 3 weeks later, he gets arrested by the Drug Enforcement Administration. One of the Drug Enforcement agents just happened to jokingly say to him, remember when you were in that hospital and you had that bullet removed from your butt? And Gigi goes, well, yeah, I do. It was only 3 weeks ago. And the agent says, well, you know, we implanted a listening device in your buttocks. Well, that didn't set very well with Gigi. He got a little upset. He hired a lawyer and demanded that the feds come clean with this information that this listening device, the tracking device, was implanted in his buttocks. And amusingly so to the press, and probably as much as the press to the public, the district attorney's office, or the attorney general, I can't remember who, issued a statement saying that, no, we didn't implant any tracking device in Mr. Portello's buttocks, but maybe some space aliens did. And that was part of the press release, which, you know, everyone got a little chuckle out of. And this guy is J.R. Russo. And you might remember him for one thing in particular. He was the guy who said the oath of omerta when the feds were monitoring a mob induction ceremony. So he was a mob killer, but he gained fame because his voice is on this audio tape giving the oath. No one, well, up until that time, no one had ever heard of anyone, you know, verbally, any mobster saying this oath. So there's another little picture of him.
If I might say, that induction ceremony was held in Medford, which is my hometown. So we're very proud of that it was actually captured for the first time.
And this guy was a vicious killer, and we'll get back to him a little later when we talk about someone else. You want to talk about Salemi?
Yeah, Frank Salemi. I mean, I think he was, again, responsible for a number of killings. He worked on both sides, both Irish and Italian hitmen. He is actually the guy on the far left side here. And I'm going to show these pictures just to show you that despite this, here's a close-up of him, despite this kind of glamorous life as a mobster, it really ages a person. And this is him later on. And so he, I believe, again, he went through a number of killings, but he ended up testifying against his former colleagues, despite any oath of silence or omerta that he took. And I believe he is in jail or died in jail. So he's in jail. Joseph the Animal Barboza. He is a very interesting contradiction. I'll speak to him and then Bev can add to that. But people are often wondering why people go into crime. Are these people, are they stupid people? Are they smart people? And Joseph was kind of a mixture. He was a Portuguese ancestry, for one thing. He was a very good cook. He was known for his cooking. He could speak 3 languages. So he was fairly brilliant, but he had an issue with, shall I say, impulse control. And so he was a very angry guy. In fact, he got his name, the animal, because he bit someone's ear off during a fight. So he was someone that the different sides would often employ as a hitman, but he was also considered a very dangerous, very volatile guy. And it was a huge coup while he was in jail for custody for one of various murders, he agreed to come clean and talk about, testify against other mobsters, and his testimony helped put people away. And this is an example of his writing when he's talking about it. He was in the witness protection program. He was out in California, but that is where he got.
That is where J.R. Russo, the man known for letting the feds hear the oath of omerta, flew out to California at the behest of his colleagues here in Boston and killed Joseph Barboza.
So you can see the reach of the Boston Mafia reached all the way to California. Now let's just go briefly to the person who you probably are the most familiar with, who is James Whitey Bulger. And I think that when we were writing this, you know, it was we were absolutely fascinated with this guy, but at the same time, he is absolutely evil. But he exerts an amazing fascination for us. He certainly has his supporters still. And I think his arrest with his longtime girlfriend, it's an astonishing fact that he was able to she was able to stay with him for all that time. But his history goes way back. This is one of his early mugshots. He was advised to wear a hat during his mugshots because it helped to sort of obscure his features. Here's him. I think this might even be even younger, one of his first arrests. And I think one of the reasons why Whitey is so absolutely fascinating is because of his brother, William Bulger. He was pictured over on the right-hand side. And Billy Bulger was a very prominent Boston politician. He was the president of the Senate. He was president of the university system here for a while. And the question becomes, how can one family produce someone on one side of the aisle and someone on the other side of the aisle, but maybe they're not that far apart. Maybe there's some connections to this. And actually, in my research in Boston history, I see this over and over again, how people in one family, one brother goes one way with the law and another brother goes another way with the law. So it's very interesting, and I think that's part of the fascination of this guy. Here's a picture of Whitey in later years, some surveillance pictures. Again, he doesn't seem that, there he is with the hat, doesn't seem that brutal. And here's a picture of him, I believe, it must be taken at Castle Island or along the coast here, and he, again, this was his office. This is where he would talk, because otherwise he was worried about being bugged about it. Here are some of the victims. White, you want to talk about these?
These are just two of Whitey's victims, and the top one is, both of them are girlfriends of Steve the Rifleman, Flemmi. And by the way, does anyone know how the Rifleman got his nickname? I always thought, before we started researching this book, I always thought that it was because he's a mobster and he's good with the guns, but in reality, he was in the military and was an expert marksman, and that's how he got the nickname the Rifleman. But these are two of his Flemmi's girlfriends, and the top one, Deborah Hussey, is actually his girlfriend's daughter. So he had the mother as a girlfriend and the daughter as a girlfriend. And the bottom one is, she was a beautiful girl. Both of them were murdered by Whitey Bulger, strangled to death in a house on, in fact, the house was located, it was Steve Flemmi's mother's house, located right next to the home that Whitey Bulger's brother, Billy, lived in, and still lives in. So Whitey Bulger strangled both of these girls on separate occasions, not together. And then they took their bodies and took the bodies down the street, a couple homes, and buried the bodies in the basement of this house. Well, when it was time for the house to sell, they had to dig the bodies up again, and then they buried them at Tenning Beach, in that Tenning Beach area in Dorchester. So this is just two of their victims. And interestingly enough, Stephanie and I were talking about this the other day, that Whitey's never murdered any of his own girlfriends, but he murdered Steve Flemmi's girlfriends. So it's kind of, he had the nerve to do that, but he couldn't do his own girlfriends. And here's a picture of the Rifleman, and he's testifying in court there. And do you want to talk about the FBI role?
I'll set it up and then we'll come. But basically, one thing that I was personally very struck with was the role of the FBI in the organized crime. And we know this. I knew this. I've been covering it. I've been reading about it. But to go in it and sort of trace it back was astonishing, that there was so much cooperation among different agents in the FBI with these different mobsters. Now, granted, you're in an area, a very gray area. You have to have your informants. You have to scratch someone's back to get information. There has to be a quid pro quo in that. At the same time, the depth of that cooperation, the depth to which some FBI agents sunk in looking the other way when murders were committed was truly astonishing. I think that even though I knew that history, to have it laid out was pretty astonishing. This was John Connolly. He was a very prominent FBI agent, very well placed and well known, and he was credited with taking down the Angiulos, the Italian mobsters, and he did it with the help of his informant, who was Whitey Bulger. And his relationship with Whitey Bulger goes back a long way. You want to talk about that?
John Connolly has told this story many times. He grew up in South Boston, where the Bulgers hung out, and he knew them. In fact, when he was a young child, he was a couple years younger than Whitey. When he was a child, he went into an ice cream store with his little friends. And, Whitey Bulger comes in and wants to buy the boys some ice cream cones. And John Connolly says to him as a child, my mom says I can't take anything from people I don't know. And Whitey Bulger picks him up, puts him on the counter, and starts talking to him like, I'm no stranger, I'm your friend, I'm your buddy. And that was how the relationship originally started. And Connolly has told this story many, many times. And in the entering years, they became somewhat close, so close, in fact, that they were having dinners together, and they exchanged presents. And, they would meet down in near the beach in Quincy and exchange information. So John Connolly had kind of a close relationship, somewhat, with Whitey Bulger. So much so that, in fact, Whitey Bulger, through his brother Billy, now I just learned this the other night, I ran into former Foster Mayor Ray Flynn who told me this story, but Whitey Bulger, through his brother William Bulger, who was the state president of the Senate, tried to pressure Ray Flynn, who was mayor at the time, into making John Connolly police commissioner. And to Ray Flynn's credit, Ray didn't do it because, I mean, at the time, the Bulgers ran this town, and with John Connolly in there, I just can't even imagine what would have happened.
That's been rumored, but you just got confirmation.
Yeah, I talked to him the other day about that. And this is two murders that occurred at the behest of Whitey Bulger, who was skimming profits from the parking lot operation at a high-lie operation down in Rhode Island. And John Callahan and Roger Wheeler were both murdered by Johnny Martirano, that's 2 of the 20 people he's admitted to murdering. What happened is Whitey Bulger became concerned that these 2 guys were going to snitch to the feds that he was skimming profits off this high-lie operation. He sent Martirano after Roger Wheeler, who was the president of High-Lie, and out to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Martirano blew him away when he got off the golf course as he was getting into his car. John Callahan, his body was found in the trunk of his car in the parking lot in Miami, not that much longer after Roger Wheeler was found murdered.
One thing I might point out, this H. Paul Rico, that's nothing to do with the Rico stand, but he was an FBI agent who was, again, in bed with these Whitey, and he was working security for the highlight, and he was helping to feed information to Whitey, who gave it to Martirano about where Roger Wheeler would be. So the culpability goes both ways. You don't hear much about Rico because just after he was arrested, he died of a heart attack or he died in some way, so he never was brought to justice for this collusion. But the fact that there was collusion, it does make you wonder. And we have no evidence to suggest that the FBI was any less than diligent, but you wonder why it took so long to catch Whitey Bulger when he has so many connections to the inner workings of the FBI. But he was caught, and here are some of the pictures. We'll just go through these. You've probably seen these most wanted pictures.
This is his girlfriend, Catherine Greig.
Yeah. Who is in the top photo. And she's a very interesting person. There was a really good article in the Globe about her, but it doesn't answer the the primary question of why someone would stay with someone like Whitey all this time, particularly as she was his second choice to run away with. Whitey actually picked up another girlfriend, Teresa Stanley, and was going to run away with her. She didn't want to go, and for some reason, he let her go back. He did not kill her, and he went and picked up Catherine Greig, and they went off and stayed with her. So she was his second choice, and yet she stayed with him. And this is a picture from when he was captured, and this is what he looked like when he was captured.
And here we have the FBI announcing his capture in a press conference. Kind of ironic that the FBI would do it, considering they colluded.
By the way, we started this book before he was captured, so we were pretty happy to see him captured because it would be a good boost for us. So one of the things that we have, and this was alluded to earlier, is that we have pictures of many of the places where a lot of these events happened in the Boston area. We can just go through these very quickly, but it's really interesting to see how many things happened very close by. This is a garage where Whitey and the Winter Hill gang used to have their headquarters. It's now a church. It's right on Winter Hill, very close by. This is the Winter Hill Bakery that you may have passed. This used to be the location of a place called Pal Joey's, a bar where people used to hang out. In the North End, this is the garage where the famous Brinks robbery had happened. And I only put this in because you can see the Freedom Trail goes right by it. So it's like there's a Freedom Trail is right next to scenes of major crimes. This is
Cafe Pompeii in the North End, and if any of you go up to the North End, I'm sure you'll see it's right on Hanover Street there. This is where one of the Angiulo boys had his office, so people would come in and pay homage to him, and give him the proceeds from the gambling. But he had his office behind this Cafe Pompeii. And once again, this is Prince Street, Jerry Angiulo's home is on the right. In fact, you can see someone like walking around near the doorway there. This is the Italian Knights of Columbus Club in the North End where Angiulo's brother used to hang out. And this is the restaurant where 3 of them were arrested, 3 of the Angiulo brothers were arrested, and where Jerry said, I'll be back, before my pork chops are cold. And this is the garage where Whitey Bulger had his own
Different garage, yeah.
Yeah, different garage. In fact, this is right near North Station. If you walk by one of the side streets there, you'll be able to see it. This is where he had his own headquarters in the North End.
When I first moved to Boston, I was working for the Associated Press, and we helped to cover a really nasty massacre, really. There was, I believe, 6 people were killed in an after-hours club, and it was involved with what we call the Tong Wars, or the Tongs, I wouldn't say Tong Wars, but Tongs, in the Boston area. And again, just to emphasize, the gangs go all over the place. There are Chinese gangs all over the world, and there were a number operating in the Boston area. We talk about them a little bit. This is actually a historic picture of a Tong attack in Chinatown way back in the 1930s. And this is actually a poster warning against Tong activities back in the 1930s. And here are some famous Boston hangouts. This used to be the Triple O's bar, and a lot of things happened here with Whitey Bulger and his crew. This is a liquor store that Whitey Bulger, still there, still a liquor store, but Whitey Bulger decided to take it over and sort of force the owners out one day, and I believe this is where the ticket was sold, and the winning lottery ticket was sold here.
That Bulger claimed
was his.
Partial ownership.
Yeah. This is a church where Connolly and the Bulgers worshipped.
This is St.
St.
Monica's. You probably have heard of it. St. Monica's in South Boston. And this is the home where Stephen Flemmi, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmy's mother lived. And this is the home where the 2 girls we showed you earlier, the 2 Debbies, they were murdered here. And it sits, coincidentally, it sits right next door to William Bulger's home. Halfway down the street, not even half a block, this is the home where they buried 3 victims, including one of the girls, and later had to dig them up and remove them because the house was being sold. And I know you probably heard about Kevin Weeks. Kevin Weeks is one of Whitey Bulger's right-hand men, and right up until the end, Kevin Weeks was with him all the time, did his bidding. These are 2 condos that Kevin Weeks and Whitey Bulger bought right next to each other. Whitey Bulger's is on the right-hand side, and Kevin Weeks is right next door on the left, right in front of that car. So that just shows you how close they were. This is the Old Colony housing project where the kids from South Boston hang out. This is where John Connolly grew up. He also grew up in the projects in South Boston. That's how they knew each other from going to church and hanging around, and so they became quite friendly.
And then we have pictures from Charlestown. Charlestown is, for example, in the town they talk about it being, the movie talks about being the bank robbing capital of the country. We're not quite sure of that, but certainly there were a lot of things that went on here. On Monument Avenue, there was a movie of that name. There was a major hit. Let's go quickly. That was a major hit there. And here we have Tenian Beach, which is where literally bodies were buried. Tenian Beach. And I'm going to finish up by talking about the last section of the book, which was we also include a section on the Boston mob in the movies. And we did this because there is such a blurring of fact and fiction between mobster myth and mobster reality, and a lot of it comes out in the movies in some very interesting ways. So for one thing, there's a lot of borrowing of real things. Has everyone seen this poster for the town? And one of the striking things is these really grotesque masks and the non-outfits. I mean, it's a bizarre juxtaposition of that. But there's actually some resonance for that in Boston history. This is a movie poster for the Brinks that was based on the Brinks robbery. That's a book based on the Brinks robbery, and again uses those mask motifs. This is another movie of the Brinks that was based on the Brinks robbery, and again you see these sort of this whole head mask, mysterious mask thing. This is from the movie The Brink's Job, again with the masks, these grotesque masks. In fact, this is Peter Falk is in this picture, Peter Boyle, a whole number of other kind of major stars are in here. This is from a TV movie about the Brinks. And here is the actual masks that were used in the Brinks robbery. And they were Captain Marvel Jr. and Captain Marvel. But people described them as so grotesque that's kind of lived on. But they're actually sort of superheroes that came to rob the Brinks robbery. One of the best movies, bar none, about Boston mob history, I mean, this is probably one of the best movies on crime ever, is The Friends of Eddie Coyle, starring Robert Mitchum. And you may have seen there was a play just recently based on this. And again, we have a mask playing a role in this. And I'm just going to, this is from the play, and I'm going to see if I can play a little scene from that movie, because that really gives you an idea of what it was like to be a Boston mob foot soldier, someone who had to make his living doing this. This is from the Friends of Eddie Coyle. It's a very pivotal scene, and you can see that living this life, living the life of a mobster was tenuous. There was not a lot of job security and very difficult. This is a very interesting story of Alexander Pritchard, who was arrested in November of 1961 in the opening days of the Irish Mob War. He was among the original gang at Salisbury Beach who got in a beef over a woman, allegedly his girlfriend, and then things escalated from there. He was arrested and held in conjunction with a murder that occurred, but unfortunately he was let off, and he did the smart thing. He moved to California, where he became an actor, who you've seen. He became actor Alex Rocco. Does anyone know where this scene is from? Godfather? He played the guy who gets it through his eye in The Godfather. Here's some other pictures of him playing the heavy in different areas. So again, he was also, when I showed you that picture of the guy in the mask and the Friends of Eddie Coyle, that was this actor. So again, you had this blending, this blurring. Here was a guy who just escaped living that kind of life, becoming a successful actor. So we're going to close with a very interesting commercial that plays on a movie you all seen and stars Alex Rocco. So let me get this. It's in mob movie history, and that's, does anyone know where that movie that's from? It's The Godfather, of course. So thank you so much for your attention here. We'll be happy to hang out and answer any questions. And we really appreciate you coming out. Doug, do you want to say anything?
I want to thank you all. We appreciate you. If you have any questions, please just raise your hand, and we'll be glad to answer them. No questions?
I think it's rather, well, I don't know, unfortunate, the mix between Hollywood and Mark Wahlberg is getting exclusive interview rights with Whitey Bulger now, and really is just a serial killer. Just mass murder. I guess it's still okay for that sort of connection to be made.
Well, we were very aware of this. We were writing this book. I mean, one thing that, for example, we were asked several times if we worried about our own safety in doing this, and we don't really feel that way. We feel like the mafia, the mob is pretty much a shadow its former self. But I particularly thought about the victims of some of these guys as I was writing this. And so when I'd write them, I wasn't picturing what the mobsters would think. I was picturing what the victims' families would think about, what they would think about us, how if we had overly glamorized these guys. I think that's a very key point. I don't know how to resolve it, because Whitey is fascinating, but as you say, he's at heart a serial killer. So how do you reconcile that? It's a real difficult for any historian, I think, in trying to apply any kind of lens to interpretation of a character in history. Any other questions? Yes.
Did you encounter anything while researching this information about the ongoings currently in Boston? And I know that there's certain groups out there. Did you find any information on them, or did you learn?
Yeah, but they've been pretty much decimated under Rico. Most of the I mean, there's always gonna be organized crime, you know, you're never gonna get rid of it, but the Italian mob is not what it used to be under, the Angiulos, the Irish mob isn't what it used to be under Whitey Bulger. Now we're seeing, and I know Stephanie's talked about the immigrant movement a lot. You know, we have immigrants coming in, that's where you see the organized crime starting. In fact, I just saw something the other day, I was watching something on TV, and they were talking about the most dangerous organized crime operation in this country, and ironically they said it's the Mexican cartels, because they kill indiscriminately. What we see with the Irish mob and largely with the Italian mob and somewhat with the Irish mob is that they kill their own. They kill their own people. They don't go out and you know, blow away a dozen people on the street because they want to hit one guy. The Mexican cartels, though, are very indiscriminate in who they kill. So that's I think law enforcement now is looking at that aspect, and you know, I think the Italian and the Irish mobs are kind of, like you said, a shadow of themselves.
Well, we'll hang around if you have any questions. If you happen to get a book, we'd be happy to sign it. And please consider us for your next book report.